Hello. Today is day 72 of the total blockade of Artsakh. For 72 days, 120,000 citizens of Artsakh have not had the ability to enter or exit their country. They are deprived of the ability to visit Armenia and to receive guests. With very limited supplies, they are forced to ration their food, and there's a system of food stamps that they use for that. Children are deprived of the right of education, since schools can't be properly heated and teachers can't even travel to their classes. And all this while Azerbaijan is disrupting the energy and sometimes even the electricity supplies. Today with our guests, we'll talk about this and other related issues, including the Munich Security Conference that took place over the weekend, as well as talking about maybe some of the past and the future of the OSCE Minsk Group. And to talk about these issues, we're joined by Suren Sargsyan, who is the founder and president of the Armenian Center for American Studies, a research center based in Yerevan. Hello, Suren. We're always looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you.
Let's begin with yesterday's sort of holiday in Artsakh, which is February 20, the date when the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Republic Parliament sent a request to the USSR, I guess, to be united with Armenia. What are your thoughts about the date? What can you remember personally, maybe, if you can say a few things?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and having me here. This is a new format for both of us, but I'm happy that we have this kind of format. I think this is very helpful. I do not remember much about 1988. I mean, I do remember, but I was like 7, 8 years old boy. I was singing these Armenian songs, some military songs, Armenian songs, and I do remember that my family during the gatherings, we were just coming together. I was singing because there was no much information coming from Artsakh, so we didn't know what exactly was happening there. But I do remember that when the war started, we tried to organize some aid to Artsakh, to Nagorno-Karabakh people. I do remember that kind of stuff. But I think this was one of the most powerful moments in Armenian history. 1988, the Artsakh movement, the global processes that we had back in those times. This was one of the most powerful moments for our nation, and unfortunately, 30 years after, we are probably having one of the worst moments in the history of Armenian nation. And today, I think you will also agree that this is one of the darkest moments in our history, unfortunately.
I mean, the 1988 struggle, it defined many of us. For me, I was just a little bit older than you, and I remember the first, I guess, signs of my political activity, going to these protests, even going to relatives and friends' homes at night to read some of these samizdat publications. That was when it was very popular at that time. But yes, I guess it's a reminder that things can be no matter the situation. I think that it's important to struggle, and I can't see how that struggle can be forgotten. But what I wanted to learn from you is your impressions about the Munich Security Conference. Over the past weekend, there was the annual Munich Security Conference, and both Pashinyan and Aliyev attended. Each of them met with the EU co-president Charles Michel, and they also had a trilateral meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. For Armenians, the conference was highlighted also by the fact, besides the fact of the trilateral meeting, there was a panel discussion that was held on the security of South Caucasus. It included, initially it was only Garibashvili and Aliyev that were supposed to participate in that, but Pashinyan was a last-minute addition to the agenda. We checked the agenda on 2 different dates, and we saw that there was an addition. And this was the first time since the 44-day war that the leaders of both countries that fought the war actually together met, at least in public. I mean, they met in private many times, but they had a public discussion. And to me, and to many, I think, it seems that the US and the EU, or the collective West, are now fully in control of the negotiation process. Armenia is now sending sort of pro-Western signals, including snubbing the CSTO, alienating Russia by declaring that the EU observers are here to keep even tabs on Russia so that they don't attack Azerbaijan. And even Aliyev said that he's okay with whoever that can help get Armenia to sign this so-called peace treaty. How would you assess this development in the negotiations? Just the fact that sort of it seems that Russia is being excluded from the process.
I wouldn't say, first of all, I wouldn't say that Russia is out, because I have an impression that there are two separate tracks. Russia is dealing with the one that Russia signed, which is, Russia is one of the parties signed, agreement of November 2020, 9th of November. Russia is a party of that statement, and Russia is involved in that regard. And the other involvement is the European Union's involvement, which is totally supported by Washington, D.C., definitely. And this format is dealing with negotiation process itself. Moscow is dealing with implementation of the agreement that were signed trilaterally. And on a separate track, the EU is working with the parties to sort of bring them together, to negotiate, to talk, etc. So I wouldn't say Russia is out, first of all. Second thing is the conference itself. Every time the head of the state is traveling somewhere like this, like bilateral, trilateral, multilateral, whatever, every time you go there, you have to bring something back with you, or at least give something, like very important statements, messages, meetings, some agreements, etc. But every time you go and do not bring anything, why did you go? I didn't see any important or any tangible thing that Pashinyan brought from this conference. Mm-hmm. Usually people are going there, leaders are going there. If you follow what's happening there, you usually see what is happening. Every state, every leader of the country is trying to bring something for own country, but this was not the case for Armenia. Right. Maybe they even didn't have anything to say during the conference. You told me that. I didn't know that, actually, that he was at it for the last minute. So the last minute. But every time you see this kind of processes happening, you see that Armenia has nothing to say to the world, which is just a disaster.
Right. Did you follow the debate or panel discussion that was held between Aliyev and Pashinyan? How did you find the back and forth between them?
Actually, I didn't see anything new here, because Aliyev is always blaming, Aliyev is always very aggressive, Aliyev is, his rhetoric is very aggressive every time, not only during this kind of debates, but always like that. And when someone is saying that to another country, to another people, he has to get a response from someone. But unfortunately, our leader is sitting there and saying nothing about it, which is a nonsense. Yeah. In diplomacy, in public relations, it's a nonsense. He's saying something bad to you, to your country, to you personally, and you're not talking a word, you're not saying a word. I think it's unacceptable for any country, for any leader, and this is another disaster that we have.
Yeah. One of the segments that I was able to catch was Aliyev basically saying that Armenia has capitulated, you have signed, and Armenians have re-elected Pashinyan, and therefore, we expect, essentially he was saying that they expect a full capitulation. So he was surprised why Armenia hasn't signed, I guess, this agreement yet. But the other thing that I noticed he didn't mention is that he didn't even mention that about the attacks on Armenian-owned territory, or I guess what Pashinyan would say is the recognized Armenian territory. Is there a strategy? You said it's unacceptable, but what could be his strategy for remaining silent in that sort of
If you're trying to find a strategy in Armenia's foreign policy, you cannot do that because there is no strategy. No basic principles, no strategy, and we're like a fireman who is running from here to there trying to see the fire and to fight against the fire.
Right.
Not to prevent the fire, but to fight against the fire. Maybe you can call it a strategy, but it's not actually, because you are always busy with something else. And now we don't have a strategy in foreign policy. We don't know where we want. We don't know where we're going. And of course, if you don't have this strategy in your foreign policy, this is the situation that you will get.
Right.
Always, not in Munich, but everywhere. If it's a tete-a-tete meeting with Aliyev, or it's with Russian president or French president, when you don't have these basic principles, you cannot achieve anything.
Right, right. Russia, of course, was not invited to the conference, and I mean, we could understand that because there is a war going on, and the West is really sort of against Russia at this point. But to me, it's incomprehensible from the standpoint of world security. And you said that sort of there's a separate track, but I guess, does that mean that the separate track, including Russia, is now more independent of the U.S. and EU efforts? And how do you think that will affect Armenia-Russia relations?
Well, we all know that there's a draft of the agreement coming from Moscow, and we know there's a draft of agreement coming from Brussels, right? I think even the Prime Minister talked about it a couple of months ago. We know that they're very different. And at the same time, we know that Brussels is giving you a draft that will satisfy them, and we know that Russia is given a draft that will satisfy Russia. I mean, they're not going to satisfy Armenia or even Azerbaijan. They're fighting for their own interests in the region, which is normal. I mean, all the global superpowers, not only superpowers, but also regional powers, are fighting for their own interests everywhere, in South Caucasus, in Central Asia, in Europe, etc. So this is not a new thing. I mean, it's old as the world,
right.
as states, as kingdoms, etc. So, but of course, we need to understand which one fits us better.
Mm-hmm.
If the plan of Moscow is much better than the plan of Brussels, we have to take that one. If we can, I mean, if we can afford it diplomatically, politically, etc. And vice versa. If we think that European plan is better for us, of course, we have to try to implement that one. I think it's very difficult for us because, as I said, we don't have a strategy. We don't know what we want. I can ask you a question. I mean, what is our strategy on Nagorno-Karabakh? Just to give it to Azerbaijan? Is it a strategy? If that's a strategy, well...
Yes. Russia has given very dire warnings to the EU and to Armenia. And we even saw Volodin, who is the, I guess, president of the National Assembly. I forget what they... or the
Speaker
of
the
Speaker of the Russian Duma.
Sort of Speaker of the House.
Yeah. He warned Armenia with the possible loss of statehood, and that it considers the EU mission in Armenia a destabilizing factor. And meanwhile, the EU has indicated many times, most recently through the Croatian foreign minister, that the mission, the EU monitoring mission, which they arrived, I guess, just yesterday, he basically said that the mission cannot guarantee that further aggressions against Armenia will happen or will not happen. And Armenia has not shown any, also like Armenia from its side has not shown any discernible activity to rearm its military, to improve its the military disbalance. What is your assessment about the development, this development of the EU monitors, this sharpening of words between Armenia and Russia, and where is this leading us?
You know, we all see that there is a big anger coming from the West and East, and that's normal because there's a war between East and Russia, right? I mean, Eastern powers are fighting against Russia in Ukraine, or Russia is fighting against collective West in Ukraine. Now we have this aggressive period of time, and we know that everyone, all the leaders, all the countries are very aggressive towards the world. And when you're trying to work diplomatically, you can balance it. But when you're trying to do some ununderstandable things for any of the party, you're losing. You're losing because you're not able to tell your partner what is the logic under your steps. I'm not talking about this European Union mission. I'm not talking about Russian peacekeepers in general.
Right.
You know that everybody's there's a big sensitivity, and when you're trying to sort of be a diplomat when you're not, you have what we have.
Right.
I mean, it's very hard. I know it's very hard for anyone to deal with the situation, because sometimes you have to be part of it.
Mhm.
You have to support Russia, or you have to support European Union, or collective West. But when you start losing something, you cannot stop the process, because you're losing this, then you're losing that third thing, fourth thing, etc.
Some analysts say that I guess any presence of even monitors, as many as we have, it will improve Armenia's security. But given that we're seeing this displeasure from the Russian side and even the Iranians, what security benefits from Armenia can be derived from this EU monitoring mission specifically? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't think that they are here to provide any security guarantees, because nobody can guarantee that Aliyev will not attack tomorrow. I mean, there is no guarantees like that, and you cannot have it.
Right.
Will it be a small factor that Aliyev will think twice? Yes, it will. But it's not a guarantee. It's just, okay, he will think about attacking like one more time. But that's it. And in that regard, I think nobody cares. Turkey, Azerbaijan, they don't care who is here. At least we see what is happening in Artsakh. Russians are there, but the Azerbaijanis are shooting on Armenian civilians, on people who are working to feed their families, and they're shooting on them. Because when you see that, you understand that no kind of guarantees can be provided by anyone. I mean, the only guarantor of your security has to be your own army, but we don't have it. Army is a very important component of stability, not only security but also stability. When you don't have it, it's done.
Right. Another thing at the Munich Security Conference was that Aliyev continued to rant about Vartanyan. I mean, that entire hall filled with statesmen, and Aliyev was basically complaining about Vartanyan, calling him a Russian citizen, a criminal, and an oligarch. Quite funny coming from someone who is a target of anti-corruption journalistic activity almost every year. Something new comes out, but
usually coming from the European Union and the United States, right?
Exactly. Yeah. OCCRP. It's just it was mind-boggling to see Aliyev use those words. And anyway, Aliyev said that Azerbaijan will negotiate with Armenians of Karabakh, and they use specifically the term Karabakh and not Nagorno-Karabakh, if and only if Ruben Vartanyan leaves. What, in your opinion, is Aliyev's the reason for Aliyev's, I guess, indigestion with Ruben Vartanyan?
That's a very nice question. I don't know, but I have an impression that there is some personal thing here. And you're right. He's saying that he's corrupt, he's oligarch, etc., etc. But at least we know right now that Ruben Vartanyan is not in sanction lists against Russia. There are like thousands of people involved in this, included in this list of sanctions against Russia, but he's not there. So if he's corrupt, if he's a Russian oligarch, etc., etc., so it should be somewhere. But Aliyev is in the center, as you said. He's always in the center of the scandal,
right? All
the time. Different media sources, different research centers, etc. They are always giving some sort of news about his billions abroad, etc. So it's really very strange for me.
And also, what do you think about this argument that many Pashinyan supporters use, or supporters of the current government, where they say that essentially direct negotiations between Stepanakert and Baku are a victory, but realistically speaking, is the power going to be equal between these two parties, between resurgent Azerbaijan, which recently won a war? What do you think? Do you think anything around the status of Artsakh could be a focus of negotiation, or, as Aliyev has said, they're categorically excluding it now? They're just going to basically talking about rights, so-called rights of Armenians in Artsakh.
I think we have to understand what is the strategy of Aliyev. If we understand what is his strategy, we will understand how to react. But I don't think that official Yerevan wants to understand his strategy, or maybe they do understand it, but they are not going to be involved. I have an impression that government of Armenia is saying, you know, we don't care about Artsakh, just take it, and if you have to do something about it, don't talk to us, talk to Russians, because we have nothing there. I think this is the strategy that Armenia is saying, or even not saying, but this is what we see, or we have an impression like that. This is basically the most important moment, what Aliyev wants and how to behave. Armenia used to be a guarantor of security of itself and Artsakh. Now we are not even we cannot guarantee our own security right now, right? Because at least we have hundreds of kilometers under Azeri occupation right now.
Right.
Now, I'm not talking about Artsakh, I'm talking about Armenia. And we know that Aliyev is planning to have the Zangezur corridor, we know that he's planning to attack, or he would like to attack Sunik region, Sevan, Gevarkunik region, etc. So we are dealing with aggressive neighbor, and we don't have any adequate counter-arguments against it to use, because the government is not doing anything about it.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned understanding Aliyev's strategy. I think that in terms of world leaders, Aliyev may be, you know, one of the unique ones who clearly explain their strategy, and so far, you know, they have done everything that they talk about, and now they're talking about even repopulating Armenia proper, you know, all areas of Armenia where there used to be, you know, Azerbaijanis. They are talking about, as you said, Zangezur, capturing Zangezur, so-called Zangezur corridor. I mean, is it that possible to ignore? Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Do you believe that it's possible to that you know that Aliyev means other things than what he's saying?
No, he's talking directly. He says directly what he wants, and he's not. And no one is from Yerevan. No one is saying that you're saying something stupid or something bad or something wrong. Nobody's saying that. That is why he can say whatever he wants to say, because no one is giving counter arguments to whatever he's trying to say. He's giving fake links or links to fake history. He said that Yerevan was part of Azerbaijan. He said that Gevarkunik was part of Azerbaijan. He said, I mean, that kind of things, and nobody's giving a counter-argument. But he's not saying it only for Azerbaijani people. He's not saying only for Armenian people. He's saying to the world. And when you're not given a counter-argument, people are thinking that maybe he's right. So again, we are dealing with a situation where when the leader of the country has to protect the interests of the country, and he has to take care of the country, not only about himself.
Right. Okay. Much has been said about a recent Azatutun report, which, based on a new set of declassified documents from the OSCE Minsk Group, or members of the OSCE Minsk Group, specifically the United States, I believe, attempts to paint a picture that international mediators behind closed doors were against the self-determination of Artsakh. The documents specifically mention meetings between Madeleine Albright and Jacques Chirac in early 1997, who agreed to essentially present a unified position and put an end to conflict. At least that was, I believe, the perception that was trying to be, painted by the sort of authors. And secret communications also apparently show U.S. and French co-chairs despairing about the unwillingness of Artsakh authorities to compromise, and about the need to support Levon Ter-Petrosyan, who I guess was more conciliatory in what they wanted. These are pre-1998 documents, so for our listeners and viewers, these are before Robert Kocharian had taken over the presidency of Armenia, but he was still in Armenia, and Arkady Lukasyan was president in Artsakh. Does this report contain any surprises for you? What were you able to learn from these new documents?
Not really, because I'm dealing with this kind of documents. Well, it was a professional job done, actually, because they did a good research. They went to the archives, digital archives of State Department, National Security Council, maybe some presidential libraries. But we have to understand something else, that now, actually, we're talking about two administrations of two presidents, Bush and Clinton. Bush until 1993, beginning of 1993, and Clinton from January 20, 1993. This was a period of time between the U.S. and Russia that some experts are calling honeymoon of the relations, because there was no Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed, there is no Soviet Union, and the U.S. and Russia started to work together. For that material, I would add another very interesting and important cable. It's not a cable, actually. It's a telephone conversation between Clinton and Boris Yeltsin, and Clinton is trying to push Yeltsin to send peacekeepers to Karabakh. This is a very important thing, because when you see that Clinton is not sure that it's something he has to do, but Clinton is pushing him, like, go there, put your peacekeepers. It will be very good for your public image, etc. So he's trying to support him. He's trying to help him, and in that regard, this period is very important. So you have to go deeper into some other details, and there are that kind of documents. I think about 2,000 or 3,000 declassified documents in that period of time. But this was done based on maybe 10, 20 documents. I mean, you go deeper. I'm not saying that you're changing the picture. Picture is the same, but you have to take into consideration the moment in history. This is very important, and when you look not from 2023, but from 1996, 1997, situation is completely different, and the relations between superpowers are very different from what we have today.
Right. Armen Ashotyan, member of the Armenian opposition Republican Party of Armenia, found some interesting details in those documents that were not mentioned by Azad Utsun. For instance, I believe it was in February 1997, Arzumanyan, foreign minister of Armenia, and Libaredian, who is the advisor to the president, each met with the U.S. Secretary of State, and they tried to explain to the U.S. Negotiators and authorities that the sort of full extent of the agreement should not be shared with Artsakh, essentially to keep Artsakh a little bit in the dark about what they're going to discuss, and to expose the truth to Artsakh very slowly in piecemeal. And I think one of the, this is a little internally, one of the biggest weapons used by Armenia's opposition at the time, against Kocharyan, was that Kocharyan, who became president in 1998, left Artsakh out of the negotiation process. But here, at least it appears that the Levon Ter-Petrosyan administration is almost doing that. Does it seem like Kocharyan essentially coming to Yerevan was actually an attempt by Artsakh to come back to the negotiations, rather than what Kocharyan is being accused of, to essentially exclude Artsakh from the negotiations?
Again, I have to say that there are many more documents about this, details, this historical period of time, the historical events for our country, because this is right after independence. I'll tell you something else. I mean, Ashotyan did a great research on that, but in 1993, 1994, we went to Washington, D.C. and said that we are ready to be your partner, strategic partner in our region, like Israel is in Middle East. We can be the same. And Washington was not very interested in that. And after 3-4 years, we signed an agreement with Russia, strategic partnership agreement with Russia. So I mean, Armenia was trying sort of to balance foreign policy. But again, they were looking at Washington. So these are just details, but there is a big strategy behind it that we have to understand. The processes, the global processes of 90s. I mean, it's just right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Russia were not very strong. It was like very weak economically, and it was not ready to protect own interests all around the world. It was like a big superpower. Now it's gone. So it had actually to deal with everything. But again, times are very different, and you cannot say like this was right, this was wrong. And the strategy was different too. On Karabakh, Levon Ter-Petrosyan's strategy was something else. I have a cable of his dinner with Secretary of State James Baker, and Ter-Petrosyan is saying that the problem of Nagorno-Karabakh is the internal problem of Azerbaijan.
Right.
So this is something very interesting to talk about today. But back during those times, this was a strategy behind the negotiation process. So times are different, so we cannot compare it right now. It's something else, and it used to be something else back then.
Hindsight is always 2020, they say, but knowing what you know about the negotiation process back then, you know, the Armenian side was victorious, and there was apparently this, you know, world powers were all trying to get an agreement. Could Armenia have done anything in that time to maybe seal a victory and avoid like these 30 years of, you know, limbo and then the catastrophic war in 2020?
You know, this question is always there. People are saying that we could go even deeper into territory of Azerbaijan. We could capture more cities, more territories. We could even go and reach Baku, etc. I mean, this kind of, and there's usually like we could go even deeper, but Russians didn't let us, their Petrosian didn't let us, etc. But again, it was a very hard time, tough times. We didn't have enough arms, we didn't have enough soldiers. Yes, Azerbaijan was weak too, but we have to understand that we were not like super powerful to go as deep as we at least could go or wanted to go.
So just based on that, do you believe that Azerbaijan was the only, I guess, impediment to an agreement that could have been achieved back then, or were some powers, some world powers, trying to, you know, in an underhanded way, maybe to sort of prevent any solution to the, you know, as you said, there seemed to be like sort of consensus that the conflict needs to be resolved, but then it wasn't resolved.
I can tell you something else. I do remember from one of this document that President Bush called President of Turkey and said, don't even think about intervention against Armenia. This was the beginning of the war.
Right.
So the US were trying to keep Turkey out because they had an impression if Turkey is in, Russia will be involved too, and it will be something, it will be a mess.
Yeah.
So they were trying to keep Turkey out. And there is a telephone conversation between two presidents, and Bush is pushing not to do that.
Yes.
So we know that Turkey was ready by that time. When we're talking about that time, we know that Turkey was preparing. They had some military units near our border, and they were ready to attack if necessary. And Bush is pushing on Turkey not to do that. This is a very important moment too. So of course global superpowers could do something this way, that way, but in general they wanted the war to stop in 1994. So everybody was pushing on ceasefire, and it happened. I mean, we got probably the most what we could have, and they got the most they could have.
Right. Okay, and the recent appointment of a new U.S. negotiator on Caucasus conflicts, or the Caucasus negotiator, doesn't mention the OSCE Minsk Group co-chair as one of the titles that this appointment would have, or one of the functions. I believe that's different from Riker's appointment, where it was explicitly mentioned that he is also a negotiator in the OSCE Minsk Group. Plus, at present, the U.S. is it seems to be involved in these negotiations at the Blinken level, so at the Secretary of State level. So we don't know where the, you know, who's going to play, you know, take the ball and run next, you know, in terms of the U.S. leadership. But still, there is this focus on Armenia and Artsakh from the U.S. leadership. Russia, on its part, recently said that the U.S. and France have sent the OSCE Minsk Group to the dustbin of history. Do you believe that the Minsk Group is dead?
First of all, we have to understand that Minsk Group is a format that was created in OSCE, but OSCE still, they don't have anything about it. I mean, they have to say, okay, this is dissolved, or this is not yet dissolved. I mean, only one country cannot say it's gone. But one more important thing, you mentioned that the appointment, they didn't mention the Minsk Group co-chair, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, when meeting with newly appointed co-chair, they mentioned the word co-chair of the Minsk Group. So sort of Armenia is saying something else, but the US is saying something else in their official texts. So this is a very important moment. We have to understand why. But again, I think it's not up to Armenia or Azerbaijan to decide whether this Minsk group is still there or it's gone for good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at the end of the day, Russians and Americans can come together on some different processes and decide that, okay, for the Minsk group, we're continuing to work together. Because right now, okay, they are not working, they're not cooperating, they're not coordinating anything, any process, any conflict in the world, but who knows what can happen tomorrow if something is signed between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, nobody knows.
Right. Okay, well, I think that we are out of time. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Our guest was Suren Sargsyan, and this is a collaboration between 168 Hours and Grung, the Grung podcast. Please visit podcast.grung.org or 168 AM for more information, and thank you for watching and listening.